Hello, hello, hello. I am Matt Williamson, and this might be a short podcast, but I think it's going to be a very informative, important one, and I think you can take a lot away from it because this morning, Monday, Football Outsiders, they do this every year, they put out their snap-weighted age for 2022, for last year. Matt, what's snap-weighted age? How old you were last year. The average age per snap at every position, they break it down in offense, defense, special teams, which I don't care about how old your special teams are. But it goes to show the players that played. You know, it doesn't mean that, hypothetical, you have an old quarterback, plays week one, gets hurt. Well, who played the rest of the snaps? So they break down every snap, the exact age to the decimal point of the players, all your left guard snaps, all your nose tackle snaps, whatever. And they figure out who played with the youngest team in the league, who played with the oldest, and some interesting stuff here. So I'm going to get the Steelers in a minute, but the Chiefs had the 31st total snap weighted age, meaning only one team was younger than the Chiefs last year, and that's frightening. The Lions were the only team younger than the Chiefs. So the average snap taken at any position for the Lions was a 25.3-year-old football player. The Chiefs were 25.4. And this is very unusual. So 4 of the 8 teams that were 26 or younger made the playoffs. Giants, Bengals, and Dallas were the other 3 with the Chiefs. That's usually not the case. You know, usually here's the way they say it. Usually there's some correlation where the better teams come out with a higher snap weighted age. Older teams are better is what they're saying historically, but not last year. Again, a lot of playoff teams, including the Super Bowl champions, were very young. And this is crazy. None of the 6 oldest teams in the league last year even had a winning record. The Bucs ended up going to the playoffs, but they were 8-9. Now, we bring up the Bucs because Brady F's things up because he's so old and plays so many snaps. It doesn't mean you're such an old team. And here's a perfect Steelers example is in Ben's last year with the Steelers offense and their snap weighted age wasn't overly reflective of what they were as a team because Ben was so old and played so many snaps, and Brady's the poster boy for this in the history of the league. But the offense around Ben was young. So we will go position by position in the second half of this. But I think this is interesting. Here are the teams that were the oldest in the league last year. The Saints were the oldest team in the league. New England, even with a young quarterback, second oldest team in the league. The Bucs were third. The Cardinals and Rams were tied for 4th. Now that's scary because those 2, I think, are in contention to be the worst teams in the league this year. And their rosters aren't the same anymore. J.J. Watt's no longer a Cardinal. The Rams have shipped off some older dudes, Allen Robinson, guys of that, Jalen Ramsey. But they were the guys that played last year were very old on those teams. Denver's next. Again, not where you want to be. Old and bad is terrible. So who are the good teams? We kind of touched on it a little bit. Who are the young teams? Detroit was the youngest. KC was next. The Giants after that. Cleveland, which is a little scary for Steeler fans. The Bengals, they were next after that. Carolina, and then the Steelers and Panthers were tied. So the Steelers were one of the youngest teams in the league. When the Steelers snapped the football or the opponent snapped the football, the average age on the field was a 25.7-year-old human being. So that was tied with Cincinnati and Carolina and only older than the Browns, Giants, Chiefs, and Lions, which isn't much different, to be honest with you. The average age is 26.4, which is kind of interesting. So that's just a side note, just kind of on a quick tangent. Last year, when the ball was snapped in the NFL, the average age human being on the field was under 26 and a half years old, 26.4 years old. I mean, it's a young man's league, and that includes Brady out there at his age skewing things and whatnot. So real quick too, they also have offensive and defensive ranks. So the Steelers offense was, I'm scrolling down here, was 32nd, which means it was the youngest offense in all of football last year. The average age for the Steelers offense was 26.4. Their defense was 16th, was middle of the road, 26.3, which implies offenses are older than defense. A lot of it's quarterback, of course. And some offensive linemen sure play a long time. And, so that makes sense as well. Offenses are older than defense. So the age of the Steelers offense they were noticeably younger. They were 24.8 on offense, 26.4 on defense. So youngest offense in the league, middle of the road in terms of age on defense. Cam Hayward has a lot to do with that. But some of their additions, Patrick Peterson, Saumalo, Allen Robinson, are all well above their average age from a year ago. And now you also have to think the Steelers offense was the youngest offense in the league last year. But they're all going to be a year older this year. So that number for Pickett, for Daniels, for all the guys you're counting on, Pickens, is going to be 1 year older, where the league average doesn't change. You get a year older, everyone else stays the same, in terms of the league average. And so that probably won't repeat itself, but it's also pretty telling to me that you had the youngest offense in the entire league and one of the youngest teams, period, in the entire league. Defense was middle of the road, which shouldn't shock anybody. We'll come back and we'll go position by position and see where they stacked up, again, last year. All right, we're back. I meant to say this on the other half too, but a little less organized I should be today. But anyway, so this was a Steeler-centric nugget they had, that the Steelers' offense, again, it's 24.8, was also close to the youngest we've ever tracked. The 2014 Jags were the only ones younger, and that was only by 0.10 of a birth year. They were 24.7. The Steelers were 24.8. And the only other defenses that are below 25 were the 2017 Browns and the 2021 Lions. The Steelers were at least a year younger than NFL average at every offensive position, although they weren't the youngest in any specific position. So they were a year younger at tight end, O-line, blah, 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 blah. But they weren't 32nd or first, however you want to look at it, at any one specific position. But this was one of the youngest offenses in the history of Football Outsiders, who've been doing this since, I think, like 1980. So again, nowhere to go but up in a way. And now you're putting some veterans in there. And, some of these, Broderick Jones is young, Washington's young. So you are also going to get a little bit of a youth infusion as well. So here's where the Steelers stack up by position. And this is a little hard to read where it's at right now. Quarterback, they're at 25.2, and that includes the Trubisky snaps. It's every snap that was every quarterback that saw the field, weighted ability. So average is 28.6. Steelers were at 25.2. Just looking at this. Tampa Bay was at 44.7. So Brady going out of the league actually kind of helps things. The average snap of a Buccaneers quarterback was 44.7 years old, where the Steelers were at 25.2 years old. Their running backs were at 24.4, also below league average, which was 25.6. The Steelers wide receivers were at 24.1, which is very young, well under league average, which was 25.9. The Steelers tight ends, 24.7, also well under the league average, which is 26.3. Their O-line, also very young, 25.2. League average is 26.9. So now we go to defense. The defensive line is the only one that is, they have these all color coded. Like if you're dark blue, the Steelers are dark blue at O-line, tight end, wide receiver. That means you're well under league average. If you're a lighter shade of blue, that's where they're at quarterback and running back. So D-line's the only one that is bright red at 29.8, meaning they're older than league average, which league average was 27 years old. Last year, the Steelers were playing with basically 30-year-olds. But yes, Cam Hayward gets a year older, as does Ogunjobi, as do we all. But you got to think Leal snaps go up. Benton comes in. The Benton for Alu switch is huge for this in terms of getting younger. So I think that's important. At edge rusher, even with Watt missing a lot of time, the Steelers were slightly under league average, slightly younger than league average. They were at exactly 26 years old, where league average is 26.6. Off the ball linebacker, they were also young, but now they're going to be much different at off the ball linebacker. And I think a little older, Roberts and Holcomb will add this, bump this up a little, but they were 25.9 as opposed to league average, which is 26.3. They just called defensive backfield, the whole thing, just all the D-backs, and splitting hairs between safeties and corners and nickels and all that can be a little hard to do. But they were a little older than league average in the defensive backfield last year, 26.5 as opposed to league average at 26. Now, Peterson's going to hurt that. Porter's going to help that, so maybe it's a balancing act. It's hard to exactly ration out the snaps, and obviously injuries screw these things up throughout the year too. You planned on playing a 24-year-old, he gets hurt, and you find some 30-year-old on the street, even though he's not part of your long-term deal. He played a lot of snaps, et cetera, et cetera. So I found that all very interesting. Hope I'm not too confusing with the numbers, but this information's all free. If you go to footballoutsiders.com, it's their headline right now. And it's pretty interesting, and I think it's very, very Steeler relevant. So I'm glad we could do that. I will talk to you tomorrow.